Hello, Atmore. It's the Lloyd and Friends Show. And now here's your host, Lloyd Alderton.
Hello, this is Lloyd Albritton, and I'm talking to this morning Mr. Don Sales. Don has not only got a voice, I told him he sounds kind of like everybody's grandfather. He's got a great radio voice, so I just enjoy hearing him talk. He's got that good Southern accent.
Well, I am everybody's grandfather. My granddaughter played softball for so long at Flomaton, and my grandsons, too, played ball there, and so they always call me Grandpa. So most of the kids that they grew up with, they call me Grandpa, and some of them comes to the college out here, and they still call me Grandpa.
Can I call you Grandpa?
You can call me Grandpa, too.
Okay. We won't do that because I'm not that far behind Don. But he does have a beautiful head of white hair, a tall, slender guy. Looks like a movie star. Maybe if we were doing video, we could probably get more listeners, huh?
Well, I don't know about that. It might scare them all off.
But Don is the director here at the Thomas E Mcmillan Museum, right here on the Coastal Community College campus. And most of you are from Bruton, probably are familiar with the museum, but maybe you'd never actually visited it. And we want to tell you a little bit about it and talk about it this morning. And maybe it would entice you to come out. Don is kind of like the Maytag repairman, you know. He gets pretty lonely out here without anybody coming to look at all the stuff that he's put together. Don, your background is in history. You say you've attended other museums.
That's right. Alger Sullivan in Century, and the old Courthouse Museum in Monroeville. And they're all beautiful and wonderful museums. But the one that we have here at the Coastal Community College is special. Now, it's really local history here, and all about the early cultural and the early natural history that we have. And it's coincided with a room here that we call the Alabama Room, where we have a lot of genealogy and a lot of local history and a lot of books that we've written and some of our members have written and published the history of Bruton and the history of Escambia County.
So this is the Alabama room we're sitting in right now.
This is
correct?
The Alabama room.
And I'm sitting here at the conference table with Don looking at all the old books in here, and he's just giving me a tour. In the other room, what's that room called?
Well, it's just the Thomas E Mcmillan Museum. That's what it's called. And we went and ate dinner at a place today, Camp 31, and in that building, they used to have an old printing press in there. And it was the earliest one in Escambia County, and we have it here in the museum, just an example of some of the stuff in our museum that we have.
You got a printing press in here.
We have a printing press that works. And
really?
We had thought about printing off maybe a newspaper a year on it. We hadn't done that yet, but I think that'd be a lot of fun. It'd be a lot of hard work.
Now, it looks like a monstrosity. Do you have to put ink in that thing?
You do. You have to put ink. You have to place each letter separately on a plate and then paint it with ink. And then it presses the paper together with the old type. And in fact, this particular model, they quit using it because it's such a monstrosity and dangerous.
What is it, cast iron that thing's made out of?
It's made out of iron, and parts of it is made out of cast iron. It's like a freight train sitting there.
Well, that had to be labor intensive, putting together. I mean, when you look at a newspaper, all the little teeny tiny letters.
Yeah.
You're telling me that each one of them had to be typeset, each letter.
Each one individually. And they had different characters that you could put in there, like if they wanted to point at a certain article, they had a finger pointing that way, like go this way and read this. And if they sold shotguns in that paper as an advertisement, you had a picture of a shotgun, and that was one type that you set in the machine.
And that printing press was down here where we ate lunch just today.
Where we ate lunch.
Camp 31.
Right, the old Robbins McGowan building.
How about
the one that has the old plow on top of it.
Okay. Now, you've got a lot of old stuff in here. I noticed you've got that printing press, and you got, I think you even had a giraffe's head in there. That's got to be a story there.
Yeah, it is. And that's the only thing in our museum that didn't come from Escambia County in this area.
But it did come from someone who lived here.
It came from someone who lived here. He's a known doctor in town, and a fellow likes to pull a prank. And he brought me that one day and said, "Here, this is yours. Put it in the museum." And I just hadn't found a place that it fits yet. It's from Africa. It's a giraffe. And the poor old feller was really,
You don't hardly have a room long enough for the neck, do you?
No.
I mean, if you hung it on the wall, it would stretch all the way across the room.
It sure would.
It's a real giraffe.
It's a real giraffe.
Wow.
It sure is. The only thing in there that's not from here. And, the museum.
Now, so they'll know. Okay, while my special guest, Don Sales, is out of the room for a little bathroom break, I want to talk to you folks just for a moment about a couple of things. I told Don that we were going to take a little break for sponsors, but just between us girls, we don't have any sponsors. That's right. We need some sponsors for this show. We've got a whole new format, the 1 hour between 7 to 8 every day, 5 days a week from now on. It's going to be include an interview or a conversation with an interesting person from our area. It will include the Fox News broadcast as well as the morning news by Jeremy Yoder, the obits and the local news. We need some help. We need some sponsorship. Our radio station is just not getting much support from the folks out at large. We need your support. Our station has been here as part of Bruton since 1941. We're struggling, but we're trying, and we need your help. We need sponsors for this program. Business sponsors, $100 a month. Individual or nonprofit sponsors, $50 a month. That's what it'll cost you to be on the radio airwaves for an hour in the morning and an hour at noon. We'll mention you, we'll promote you, and you've got access to these radio airwaves. I know it'll help you and it'll help us. So give that some thought, will you? And give me a call, Lloyd Albritton at 850-281-3233, and I'll show you how we can get started as a sponsor for this wonderful program. Oh, here comes Don. Hey, Don, yeah, come on back. We're ready to get started. Have a
tree and hand hew that pine tree up into cross ties. And as a farmer, when you wasn't planting or harvesting, you could sell that back to the railroad and make a little money to get you over hard times. Also, you could collect turpentine out of the trees and sell the turpentine. And so there was a way for everybody to make a little money. But the big logging companies here in Bruton and around could chop down trees and put them in the creek out here and then into the river and float them right down to Pensacola Bay. And since Pensacola Bay was a deep water bay, ships from all over the world could come into Pensacola, and logs from Bruton was shipped all over the world. They loved our yeller pine.
Well, how long have they been making paper out of wood? When did they start pulpwooding?
Well, pulpwooding in Bruton started with the early Container Corporation when that come in, and that come in the 60s, really. And might have been the late 50s that it come in. That was the first,
You're talking 1900s, 1960s?
yeah,
Really?
that container come in. That was the first pulpwooding in Brewton.
Okay.
They had one a little bit earlier in Pensacola, in Cantonment there, the big pulpwood mill
Okay.
there. And it was a little bit earlier.
But before that, most of the logs were just logs,
They were just
cross
logs.
ties or just for building, whatever.
They
Lumber? They had sawmills. They cut
had
lumber.
lumber later on that they would sell locally here. The big lumber mill that was in Foshee at the time, everybody around knows where Foshee is. Alger Sullivan bought Foshee out, and most of the lumber from Foshee is what built Century and the big mill in Century, the Alger Sullivan mill. And so we've had pulpwooding and we've had lumbering, and people would take those logs and log dog them together. It was two spikes with a chain, and they would log dog two logs together, and then another set of logs.
You're calling it log dog?
Log dogs, sure is. And they would ride those rafts made from log dogs and log all the way to Pensacola.
Wow.
And it was cash money that they could get, and they'd ride a horse, catch a ride back on a wagon or something other, and make another trip. Sometimes they'd spend a night in Pensacola. It was Pensacola's early days. You know, they had just finished the railroad that ran through Brewton to Pollard right before the Civil War. So around 1859, somewhere around there, they finished the early railroad, Florida and Alabama Railroad, and eventually that went all the way to Pensacola. And during the Civil War, the North that had already taken Pensacola couldn't figure out why they was getting a Montgomery newspaper in Pensacola, because they would check the train as he come in, but somehow every day the Montgomery newspaper was sneaked into Pensacola, and the folks there in Pensacola could read the Montgomery newspaper during the Civil War.
Is that right? Montgomery Advertiser then?
That was. It was a Montgomery Advertiser.
Okay.
Have a copy of it laying here in the Alabama room.
Now, the Civil War, there was Alabama, you were telling me earlier about a supply depot or something here.
Yeah, right in Pollard. Pollard wanted to be the junction for the railroad because right before the Civil War and during the Civil War, Pollard was pretty big. It had storehouses there that they stored, huge buildings that they stored everything that you needed to run a war with. So Mobile would come up, Montgomery would come up and get a cannon or guns or whatever they needed, food right out of Pollard. And later on, they didn't make Pollard the junction to Pensacola. They made Flomaton the junction to Pensacola. And that was Flomaton's first name, was Pensacola Junction. So this whole area here is just so full of history, and this museum and this Alabama room, we want you to come and visit it and look around and research your own family. You'd be surprised of how many families we have their history right here in this room, and you'll have so much fun finding out about your uncle or your grandpa, and we might even have a picture of the house that they lived in.
Don, let's take just a quick break for the benefit of some of our sponsors, and we'll be right back with Don Sales, director of the Thomas E. Mcmillan Museum. We'll be right back. Okay, while Don is out of the room on a little bathroom break, I need to talk to you folks for just a moment about something very important. You know, I told Don that we were going to take a little break for our sponsors, but actually, just between us girls, we don't have any sponsors. This is a new format that we're beginning on this show. We're working very hard to be worthy of your advertising dollars, but make no mistake about it, we need your advertising dollars in order to bring each day the wonderful programming that we're bringing to you. One of the things that we're doing is trying to improve this morning show that we know y'all enjoy so much. We've added the Lloyd and Friends show to the format, a conversation with a different, interesting person every morning for your enjoyment. This hour between 7 and 8 will also include the morning show with Jeremy Yoder. The obits and all the stuff that you're used to. But we're going to flesh this out for you. But it takes a lot of work, and we need some advertising dollars from you. That's the only way we can survive. It's the only way we can bring you these programs. So what we're looking for is some sponsorship for this morning hour. We're talking about $100 for a business sponsorship. $50 for an individual or nonprofit sponsorship. We need your support. We need a lot of you to support this station and all that goes on here. So call me, Lloyd Albritton, at 850-281-3233, and let's talk about how you can be a sponsor for the Lloyd and Friends show and for the morning news hour. We hope to hear from you. Hey, here comes Don. Come on in. Hey, Don, come on in. Sit down. Okay, here we are back. This is Lloyd Albritton on Lloyd and Friends. Interesting conversations with interesting people. And today we're talking with a very interesting Mr. Don Sales, who is the director of the Thomas E. Mcmillan Museum right here on the Coastal Community College campus. Don, tell us some stories. Now, you know, everybody loves to hear a story. These old railroad bill stories are a lot of fun. You know any railroad bill stories?
Well, you know, it's funny you asked that. Growing up as a kid around Century and Flomaton and Bruton and Atmore, they had songs out at the time. New Christy Minstrels had a song.
I remember those.
You remember those?
Yeah.
It was a large group of singers, and they had banjos and mandolins and
that folk
guitars.
Music was really big. The Kingston Trio, those kind of.
Yeah, it really was.
In fact, we had over at our school at Ernest Ward, what did they call those? Hootenannies?
Hootenannies.
Back in the 60s, we used to have those hootenannies at schools.
It sure was. And they'd gather up, and folk music sang about folks. It sang about the early times. But they had a song called Railroad Bill. And I remember singing it, but I didn't know they were singing about a man from this area. And come to find out, he robbed trains. He'd robbed this train when it left Bruton, before it got to Pollard or before it got to Flomaton or coming into Atmore or coming out of Century. He'd rob them and throw out food at the houses next to the railroad track. And those people getting food back in those days from Railroad Bill, they would hide him from the railroad agents. And so it was a kind of a Robin Hood thing for a long time.
I've heard that, yeah.
Well, then he got a little meaner. You know, he started killing people. Had shot the sheriff over in Baldwin County and shot the sheriff here in Bruton. Killed the sheriff here in Bruton. Sheriff McMillan that everybody loved so much. He was just loved by the whole community. And then,
now, what period are we talking about now? About when was that?
We're talking about the early 1800s.
Or late 1800s.
And the late 1800s. When Sheriff McMillan was killed, well, see, Railroad Bill started early in the 1800s and about midway. And when Sheriff McMillan was killed, it was 1894, fixing to go. In fact, it was the week before 4th of July. The town here in Brewton was getting ready to celebrate 4th of July, and Railroad Bill had killed Sheriff McMillan, and they even put off having 4th of July and opened the jail back up the 17th of July. Took about 2 or 3 weeks to bury the sheriff, and they opened it back up, and the new sheriff was Sheriff McMillan's brother, who was his deputy, and that was James McMillan. So, but there was a fellow in the jail that a lot of people don't know about, but they'll recognize his name. He was in the Brewton jail right before Sheriff McMillan got shot, and that was John Wesley Harden. And from Texas. You'll know him as one of the last fast gun shooters, killed over 40 men. And said he killed one man just for snoring. So I wouldn't want to be around him because my wife tells me I snore. I don't believe her, but...
you never know, what might happen.
What might happen.
Well, John Wesley Harden, was he from Texas or was he from down our... I understand he was from around Pollard.
He was. He had family in Pollard. His wife lived in
In
Pollard.
fact, he was captured in cantonment.
On a train.
On
Right.
the train, okay.
They got word, one of the conductors or somebody on the train had recognized John Wesley Harden and got word to the sheriff, and as soon as they had a stop, they surrounded John Wesley Harden, and he gave up. But they carried him back to Texas, and while he was in jail, he studied
Law?
to be a lawyer and became a lawyer. And
He killed 40 men. They never hung him, did they?
they never hung him. They sure did.
He spent some time in prison, though.
He spent a lot of time in prison.
Did he ever get out?
He got out and became a practicing lawyer.
No kidding.
And, you know, I don't know for sure, but I imagine judges had a hard time ruling against him, knowing his record of killing over 40 men.
Of course, that could have been some rumor, but he must have killed a lot of men. I heard it was 27, but
Yeah, you
maybe...
hear numbers. Whoever writes the story, you know, they come up with their own numbers.
But he killed a few people, no doubt.
He killed a bunch. And if you read the story in Texas, you know, everything's bigger in Texas.
That's right.
So his gun was bigger and the number of people he killed was bigger.
Now, his father was a preacher, wasn't he? Or did I get that wrong?
his father was a preacher. It sure
So he
was
was probably raised right. Just
He was probably raised
good boy
right.
went bad.
Just started gambling, and that's what got him caught in Pensacola. He went to Pensacola to gamble. And they would catch the train and gamble on the train there and back.
You know, I used to get these old time life books with all the old gunfighters. I loved reading those. John Wesley Harden, of course, was one of them. But I used to love to read about those old gunslingers from the Old West.
Wild Bill Heacock.
Wild Bill, yeah.
You know, that was my favorite thing to do as a boy, is to Saturday afternoon go to the theater. And you could pay and go in at the matinee and stay in as long as you wanted to. And that taken up a lot of Saturday afternoons. Our store, we run a store, and it closed up at noon on Saturday. So we had Saturday afternoons free.
You know, there was a lot of outlaws around here, too. They weren't maybe as famous as some of those Western outlaws, but my father was quite a storyteller, and he used to talk about a lot of early guys. They sounded like outlaws to me.
Well, you're right. You're right. The early days of this county and all, it was wide open, just like any wild town, before they had a sheriff or anybody to keep law and order.
Well, you know, back in the day, another thing that was pretty common was these old whiskey steals.
My goodness.
Everybody had a whiskey steal.
Everybody had, well, you know, the same steel that you make turpentine out of,
You can make whiskey.
you can make whiskey out of it. And whiskey was what a lot of people needed back then to pour on wounds and for medicinal purposes. Of course, a lot of people took it to the extreme. And,
they drank it.
And they drank it, you know. So that's not too good for you. That tears your veins up and tears your heart up. But a lot of people did drink. And, of course, some
It'll
people...
make you mean, too, won't it?
Yeah, you know, some of those moonshiners, they had a name for their whiskey. Some of it, I know I was listening to this one moonshiner. He didn't do that anymore, but he said he made a whiskey that he called Laughing Whiskey, and another one that he called Dancing Whiskey, and then another one that he called Marrying Whiskey. So,
well, that was early marketing, wasn't it?
I guess that was early marketing.
Well, I know that stuff will take a toll on you. Back post World War II. My family lived out in a little rural community near Atmore, a little area called Nokomis, piney woods and dirt roads. And people of my father's generation, it seemed like to me an inordinate number of them were drunks. We call them drunks then. They call them alcoholics now. They didn't go to any meetings. But they literally drank that stuff, and they walked around in the area with a bottle in their back pocket, and they just drank it straight.
That's right.
They drank it straight out of the bottle. And my brothers and I would often play in the woods, you know, catching a rabbit or a squirrel or building a treehouse, and we would come up on these guys. They might be laying in a ditch or just stretched out after a Friday night, would just drink themselves into a stupor. It seemed like in that time that we had a lot of alcoholics.
We had
people
a lot
addicted
of
to alcohol,
alcoholics.
and it not only caused. And I saw this firsthand. I'm 70 now, and I'm often amazed at being 70 years old, the history that I've seen in my lifetime. You know, you're like me. We probably they didn't have any computers when we were growing up, no cell phones or any of that stuff, and
No television.
No, that's right. No television. They had television, but we didn't. We didn't have one.
You know, we had a radio, and just a little bit after dark, the radio station would quit broadcasting.
Everybody.
And all of our neighbors would come over and sit on the porch with us and listen to the different radio shows. And it was marvelous. It was wonderful. You could.
I can
listen to
remember my
Grand Ole
parents
Opry.
going over to friends of theirs on Saturday night. Us kids would play out in the yard till late after dark, and they would listen to the Grand Ole Opry.
Yeah, that was a big thing. Minnie
It was a big-
Pearl.
yeah, on the radio.
I don't know how old Minnie Pearl was at the time, but when I was a little kid, she was on the radio then.
Yeah, yeah.
But
Well,
you could listen to Amos and Andy. A lot of people don't know who Amos and Andy is, but they were so funny. And after a hard working day out in the field, people could sit on the porch and relax and laugh a little bit. When the radio went off, all our parents would sit around and tell little stories, you know, about what went on when they were children and when they were young.
Well, you know, that's interesting that you bring that up, because that was kind of on the tip of my tongue. I've seen a lot of history during my lifetime. A lot of things change. But what's interesting is I had the opportunity, and I'm sure you did too, we kind of lived near our grandparents in those days. You'd just wander across the pasture up the road and go into Grandma's house and get some eggs or milk. She usually had some chickens or a milk cow. And many times I would sit on the front porch with my grandfather and listen to him tell stories about people and things. And, you know, that took me back. There were no cars and no airplanes.
Yeah.
Back further than I was able to live. And so hearing those stories firsthand kind of increased the scope of my lifespan, knowing those people.
We'll be back with more of the Lloyd and Friends show in a moment, so hang tight.
This is Lloyd Albritton back with you again on Lloyd and Friends. Interesting conversations with interesting people. And we're joined here again with Mr. Don Sales. He's the director of the Thomas E. Mcmillan Museum, and he's quite a storyteller. We've heard some good stories so far. Yesterday, I guess we were talking about this. Don, interesting concept here, this Thomas E. Mcmillan Museum. Who was Thomas E. Mcmillan?
Well, Thomas E. Mcmillan was the father of Tom McMillan, that's part of the museum, a good friend of mine, and a person that really looks after the museum. This is a special place for Tom because he can come in here and he can see his family's history. And I can come in here and I can see my family's history. You know, one of my grandfathers and one of my uncles served with Tom's great-grandfather during the Civil War. Tom's great-grandfather was captain of the 15th Cavalry. And a couple
What was his name? You remember?
His name was Lee. His last name was Lee. And that's what our library here at the college is named after. It's named the Lee Museum. I mean the Lee Library.
The Lee Library.
Yeah. And so we have a lot of history that's together, and when you form history in a war together, it's more than just living close to each other or just knowing each other, because we knew that our grandfathers sweated and bled and worked and got scared and got happy together. You know, kind of like you and me. When we talked earlier, we found out you went to school at Ernest Ward, and I went to school at Century about the same time, and we played football against each other.
That's right.
And
We were big arch rivals,
Oh,
Century
yeah.
and Ernest Ward.
You know, that's real funny, because every year we have a high school reunion. The Century High School is no more. They closed it down.
That's right. And oddly enough, combined it with Ernest Ward.
Combined it to become North.
How about that? Mortal enemies, and now they got us together over
Now
there.
they got us together. But my goodness, playing football, one of my old pals that I played right next to for so many years, he's dead now. But every year we'd get together and talk about playing football, and you know, we became better and better every year. I don't see how we ever lost a ball game.
The more you talked about it, the better you. Well, you know what's amazing? Those were such good years. When I get together with some of my old buddies from high school years, and we talk about particular games, we remember every detail of that game.
That's true.
Remember, this guy did this, and he turned to the left, and he turned to the right, and we remember the scores. Those sports played such an important part in our lives, it seems like.
Oh, it helped
we
us
have
grow
such vivid
up.
memories of them.
It helped us grow up. And
We're turning into little boys again when we get together.
Oh, my goodness, we sure do. But I remember one night, Century was playing W.S. Neal, and W.S. Neal was a bigger school than Century. And it was so cold that night that I had wore long handles under my uniform. And long handles was white, and after a quarter of sweating, my long handles come unrolled under the bottom, so my legs was white. Then you could see my long handles playing football. And
Don, how much did you weigh in high school?
my goodness,
About 135, probably.
about 155 was
155.
my top weight.
You know, I see the boys playing high school football today, and they're big and muscled up like college players.
They
We were all
sure
just a
are.
bunch of skinny country boys back then.
We were skinny country boys, but that was the difference right there. We were country boys, and we worked all our lives.
We could run. We could run all day without getting tired.
We could run. I know on our farm we had a bull that was pretty mean, and you had to be able to run to get away from that bull because he'd run after you.
Yeah.
But playing football was something, and basketball and baseball and running track was something back then that kept us all busy in the summertime and in the wintertime. It just gave us something to do.
Yeah. Well, I remember clearly Century was an arch rival of ours, and we seldom beat Century. Every maybe 3 or 4 years we'd beat Century, but they were always littler than us, but they were always had a lot of speed, and they hustled, and Century could win games just on pure hustle because they never seemed to be very big, and y'all had the ugliest uniforms.
Well, now, I love those black and gold uniforms.
That black and gold. I didn't mean to offend you.
Oh, you wouldn't do that.
But Century sure did have some. Now, who were the coaches back in those days? Who was it made those teams so good? Because
my goodness. We had a coach that came to Century. His name was Gene Lewis. Now, Gene was from Arkansas, and he played football at Arkansas. And that first year he came in with spring practice, and I thought my life was over. I thought he was going to kill us. We worked so hard. And, back in those days, those coaches wouldn't let you have any water during practice.
That's right.
And when practice was over, I'd have drank out of a mud hole, and water tasted so good out of an old rubber hose that tastes so bad now. They say stuff like that'll kill you, but we drank water wherever we could get it. But wouldn't let you have any water. Had breaks during the ball game that you could have a little bit of water.
Yeah.
But later on, when I was coaching Pee Wee football around town, I know Coach Bear Bryant sent Coach Goosetree, who was his trainer, from Alabama down to Florenton, and he told us then that giving water to the boys and hydrating them was the best thing in the world. So we started giving water to the boys then.
I heard Bear Bryant in an interview one time talk about his early days coaching. I believe he coached in Arkansas or somewhere like that.
He did. He was from Arkansas.
Yeah. Before he came to Alabama, he wishes he had not been. He wished that he had not been so hard. He said because he didn't let the boys have water, and then later he realized the danger of that. He said I could have killed some boys.
Yeah, but he didn't know that.
He didn't know. Yeah. Yeah.
It's just like alcohol. When, like you was talking a while ago, people used to drink it religiously, all the time, drank a whole bottles. We didn't have the studies then that we got now that alcohol is so bad for your veins and your heart now like it is.
Yeah. Okay, let's see. There was a story I wanted to give you. I got distracted, but talking about that alcohol. I always, and I don't want to tell too much on myself, but I have had a few nips myself from time to time.
Well, I couldn't tell.
When I was growing up, Daddy was pretty strict. I didn't touch alcohol, but when I went off in the Marine Corps, I discovered that nickel beer at the EM Club, and that was just, I'd never had done any drinking before, so Marines are supposed to, they teach you to get drunk and fight. That's what Marines are all about. So I discovered that nickel beer, and in the years later that I occasionally had a drink, I always ended up getting in trouble. In fact, every stupid thing I ever did in my life, I was usually drinking. And I hear these stories back in the day. My grandchildren, when they say back in the day, they think I lived back with Abraham Lincoln or George Washington, They say, Paul, did y'all do such and such back in the day? Did you know Abraham Lincoln? Yeah. Back in the day is way back. So back in the day, that my father used to tell stories about people They were just downright mean. They'd shoot one another and stab one another, and they carried guns. They used to have a little church down by where I grew up. It's called Antioch Church. Some people are familiar with it. Just a little brick church. And back in those days, the women would worship, and the men would stay outside. They'd shoot craps, dice, or they would drink moonshine. And just kind of wait for the women to get out of church meeting, and they'd get drunk, and sometimes they'd have a fight, take it right into the church. There'd be cuttings and stabbings. I've heard numerous stories about that. Well, I knew this guy. His name was Ubi Coon. Did you ever know Ubi Coon?
I've heard of that name before.
Ubi's from down around Booneville, and Booneville used to be a pretty rough place. And I knew Ubi when I was a boy, and he had kind of straightened out his life by then, and he was a pretty good guy. But my great-grandmother told me, when I told her that I knew this big, tall, mean-looking guy named Ubi Coon. He used to have a handlebar mustache and always he looked mean. He's about 6'6" or 6'7". And my great-grandma, she says, "Oh, I know Ubi Coon." I said, "Yeah, he was pretty mean." That he used to play baseball with your grandpa, with his boys. Pretty good baseball player, but he used to carry 2 guns. And I'd always heard that story. Well, then later, when I got grown, I got to know Ubi, and we became pretty good friends. And we were sitting and talking one day, and I said, "Ubi, I want to ask you a question." He said, "Okay." I said, "My grandmother told me that you used to carry 2 guns. Is that true?" And he kind of chuckled a little bit, and he said, "No." He said, that ain't true. He said, "But I'll tell you about where that story got started. I think I know how it got started." And I said, "Okay." And he said, "Well, I used to play my fiddle at these old barn dances." And he said people would be drinking moonshine, whiskey, and everything. And he said, my brother came over to me and asked me if I would hold his gun. Because this girl that he was dancing with didn't like him having that gun. He asked me if I'd hold his gun for him, and so I took it and put it under my jacket on the other side of where my gun was, and so I had 2 guns in my belt. And he said a little while later, a fella came along and invited me to go outside for a little snort. And so I did, and he said when I got out there, he pulled his knife on me and said, accused me of messing around with his girlfriend. And he said, I just pulled my jacket open and showed him my 2 guns. And I said, now I want to show you just how dumb you are. Now there you are standing there with that knife, and here I am with 2 guns. You fixing to get yourself killed. And he said the man put his knife up and got friendly and went on. He said, but after that rumor started that I always carried 2 guns. He said, but it ain't true. I only carried 1 gun. But a lot of them did carry guns and shoot one another.
It's amazing how rumors get started. But you was talking about how people in the military like to drink. My dad spent 37 years in the military. He was a U.S. Navy diver. And he was part of a UDT team, that was underwater demolition, and part of a mine hunting unit. And those fellers were, to fit in a diver's uniform, they were built small, but they were wiry, and they were fighters. And when they come home to port, they would get drunk. And that's what they did. They fought and then they drank. And he did that in the military for 37 years. And expanded all the way back from World War II until the Cuban Missile Crisis. He told me that during the Cuban Missile Crisis, when Russia was steaming toward Cuba with missiles on board their ships, that we had encircled Cuba with every ship that we had left over from World War II and the Korean War. He said there was more ships in the water and more guns sticking up that you could not see water. All you could see was ships and guns.
Wow.
And right after that is when he retired. Bought him a little camp house and down on a camp on the Yellow River and the Mitchell River, and a little fishing camp. And but military people, they fight and they do drink.
They drank. Hello, folks. While we're taking just a quick break here, our final break from my interview with Mr. Don Sales, just want to remind you one more time, we need your sponsorships. We need you to sponsor our program. $100 a month for business sponsorships, $50 for individual or nonprofit sponsorships. Call me and ask me what it's all about. Ask me what we can do for you. These airwaves are extremely valuable, and we can get your message out to the people through the radio airwaves. So help us out, won't you? Give me a call, Lloyd Albritton at 850-281-3233, and ask me about sponsoring the Albritton and Friends show. Now let's get back to the last segment of my interview with Mr. Don Sales. Do you know Jim Eddins from the Perdita Winery?
I do. I know of him.
Jim's a good friend of mine. He's a character. He's in his 80s now, and you wouldn't know it the way he chugs along. But Jim's a retired Marine colonel, and he's often joked about, religion has given him a hard time on his winery down there, the churches.
I imagine.
And Jim's often said, well, when the Marines formed, they sent them to recruit the first batch of Marines. They sent them to a little place called Tunn's Tavern, was the place where the Marine Corps was formed, Tunn's Tavern. He said, I want you to take note that when they went to find fighting men, they didn't go to the churches. They went to the bars.
Yeah, that's true.
But it does seem like promotes you to want to fight.
Well, I guess it does, It's just like that old moonshiner I told you about a while ago, and I forgot about that one kind of whiskey that he made. He made the Marion whiskey and the dancing whiskey and
okay.
And the happy whiskey. Well, he made a fighting whiskey too.
A fighting whiskey.
I guess that was his strongest brand.
It must have been tequila.
You was talking about playing baseball, and that was a big thing for men and boys to play baseball. Different towns in the summertime would get up baseball teams.
It didn't take a lot of equipment.
No, it didn't, and it was easy to make a field, and put up a backstand.
Out in the cow pasture somewhere.
Out in the cow pasture. And most companies had their own baseball team. I know my uncle, he was a real good hitter, and he was a real good pitcher. So Alger Sullivan hired him to work for them. They didn't know for the first few weeks whether he was going to be working, but he was a real good baseball player, and they wanted him to play for them. And so he worked for them a long time after he got out of the Navy. And, it's a funny story about this same man, this same uncle. When he joined the Navy, when he got out of training, he was on his way to Saipan, and World War II was still going on. So during about halfway in that trip to Saipan, we had dropped the atomic bomb, and the war had ended. And by the time all these sailors and soldiers and Marines got into Saipan, they didn't have nothing to do. So they divided them all up into baseball teams, and through all those baseball teams, and there was hundreds of them, my uncle's team won the championship, and I have his plaque where he was champion in 1945 in Saipan. And that's just amazing how baseball resonates between the towns and the companies and the military.
How about that?
We love our baseball in this country.
Well, when boys or men even would work on the farm or in the woods all week long, and they wanted a little recreation, they'd get out and play baseball.
They would get out and play ball. I know I did when I finished high school. Every summer that I could, on the weekends, I'd get out there and play. If they had a softball team, I'd play. If they had a baseball team, I'd play. And it was a lot of fun, and it helped keep us in shape.
Don, I want to kind of summarize a little bit before we close our interview. It's been a delight spending some time with you.
Well, thank you. It has here, too.
I know that the folks out here who are listening to us, I believe they will enjoy some of the things that you've said. I want to make another sales pitch for the library here. I'm surrounded here as we're sitting here with all these old books. And we've also talked, I think one of the things that has connected us is our interest and love for family history research and genealogy. And so Don has here a lot of old books. What's in these books, Don?
These books,
why would anybody want to come down here and look at these books?
My goodness, they're full of history. They're full of our local history. You'd be surprised that your grandfather and your grandmother and your uncles is right here in this little library of mine, right here in these books. If they're from Conecuh County or Escambia County, they're right here in these books, right at the beginning. We've got some great authors that live right here in our area that when we collect enough history, we put that history into books. And it's just so good. You can come here if you're wondering what happened in Bruton during the Civil War, or if you're wondering what happened in this area during the Revolutionary War, or during World War II, or during the Yellow Fever area. You know, I can look that up and show you, and show you some wonderful things that went on in the past. And we're just so full of history here, and it never gets old. I had a lady that come in yesterday, a little bit after dinner. She come in from Jacksonville, Florida, and just had a day to spend right here. And she brought in some pictures and a lot of information. And when she left, I gave her a lot of information and even some pictures of her old home place that her parents lived in when they lived here in Escambia County. And so you can look up your genealogy, you can study Alabama history, Escambia County history, Conecuh County, or any county surrounding us, and just come in and have a wonderful time, or just come in and look at the museum and see what wonderful stuff that we have. And you know, there's not a thing that anybody had to go out and buy in our museum. It's all due to the wonderful people that lives in this area. They'll collect stuff all their life and run out of room in their house to keep it. And they'll come down here and say, I've got this stuff, reckon, can you use it? And my goodness, that's how we get most of our stuff. So if you got something laying around your house that's old, I can probably use it right here in the museum. And you know, Lloyd, you was asking me a while ago how this building got started. Well, this whole art center that we're in, which covers the arts and crafts and pottery room and the history rooms on each side of me, and right in the center, the research room and the library and the Thomas E. Mcmillan Museum was started. The museum was started in about 71 in the old library, and so some money put together by some really wonderful people built this building and gave the land and gave the building to the school. and it has just added so much rich history to this school. And I only know of one other school in the area that has a museum, and that's over in Thomasville, Florida. And it's a wonderful museum also. But when you have a little time, come down to the school, and my building is the only one that has 5 flagpoles in front of it. And it's the 5 flags that flew over Alabama. And you just walk right in, and you'll just have a good time.
Now, you're here what days?
We're open now Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays from 9 to 4:30.
9 to 4:30, Tuesday,
And we
Wednesday,
will
Thursday.
come back and open another day if you want to come in and bring a tour group in, or a church group, or just any kind of group in, or come in individually.
Now, back in the day, I can remember 20 or 30 years ago that I would do research, or we'd drive up to Montgomery, or we'd go to the courthouses and look up hard copy stuff. And, a lot of the family research has been, in the age of computers, has been digitized to where most people spend a lot of time on the computer, because ancestry, family history, family search, there are a lot of computerized data that's been digitized. But, you lose a lot of the charm that we used to feel when we would actually go and look at these old documents.
That's right. And it's kind of hard to read everything on a document once it's been microfished and then digitized. And you can walk into a place like this and actually hold it and look at it, and walk into Montgomery and really look at it.
You just kind of catch the spirit of it, don't you?
You do. You sure do it. And I tell you, when I walk into this building, I can't hardly wait to get here in the mornings. And I'm supposed to shut the door at 4:30, and let's see, yesterday it was 6 o'clock before I turned the key on the door, and you just never know, and time just passes so quick here.
Well, Don Sales, director of the Thomas E Mcmillan Museum, it's been a delight.
Well, thank you, Lloyd. Thank you. I've enjoyed it myself.
Well, I hope we can get together at a later time maybe and get an update, and you can keep us posted on new things that are going on.
Well, thank you. I will put in a plug for the Historical Society here. We have a meeting every 4th Tuesday of the month at 3 o'clock.
Every 4th Tuesday at 3
Right.
o'clock.
And this 4th Tuesday coming up will be an update on the Don Tristan de Luna expedition that come in with several ships at the port of Pensacola, and a hurricane came in and sank every one of those ships. He came from South America, Central America, where the Aztecs Indians, and brought Aztecs Indians in with him to the port of Pensacola. And so Dr. Benchley will come in and give us an update on that De Luna settlement that was in Pensacola.
Who's invited? Who's invited to this?
Anybody.
Anybody can come.
Anybody can come, and anybody can join our Historical Society. All the requirement is that you love history.
There you go. Okay. Don, thank you so much. This is Lloyd Albritton, Lloyd and Friends. Interesting conversations with interesting people, and we've just spent some time talking with a very interesting guy. And y'all come by and visit the museum and see if you can find something here that might tickle your heart a little bit. It's good stuff. Until next time, this is Lloyd Albritton saying thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening to the Lloyd and Friends Show with Lloyd Albritton.